lesson over overcoming discouragement, frustration. Obviously, a lesson that we don't even worry about because we're never afflicted by such. But who knows, we might be able to help somebody else along the way. Anybody else? All right, we got some hands up. And if you already have yours, we're at the very bottom of page 87. Bottom of page 87. I have marked. And of all things, in the midst of inspired instruction as to how to overcome discouragement and frustration, and we looked briefly at, of course, an example from 1 Kings chapter 19, where you've got Elijah who's wore plumb out. And one of the things that he needs to do is eat something, settle down a little bit, relax. He's tired, physically exhausted, and he needs to rest. He needs to rest. There are obviously situations we find ourselves in, sometimes not by our own choosing, that absolutely wear us out physically. And if it only wore us out physically, then that'd be one thing. But our physicality is connected to the rest of us too, and we end up being run down mentally, emotionally, and spiritually oftentimes. And that's when it gets serious. That's when it matters that we be able to do the right thing by ourselves and overcome the difficulties that have been placed upon us because we've allowed ourselves to become completely wore out. And that's the example of Elijah. The perfect example of an individual who went from the mountaintop experience of defeating the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel in chapter 18, a yee-hoo moment in his life, and then it wasn't within a day's time that he's down so deep in the valley he can't see his way out. How could it happen so quickly? Well, if we're honest with ourselves, we would have to admit that in our lives, it seems as though those deep, dark valleys of despair oftentimes follow something that is uplifting and almost a mountaintop experience. That's the way life is. We wish everything was sort of like a plateau, but it's not. You know. Along with big things that encourage us and spur us on and make us feel good, then oftentimes those very times are followed by situations that are not encouraging, that are just plain old frustrating or discouraging and all that goes along with it. But we don't have to feel like the Lone Ranger, you know, because that's the way it's always been with humanity from the very, very beginning. But God has not left us without instruction as to how to get through matters like that. And associated with it right here, of course, is the fact that even the Lord took a break from time to time and rested. Yes, the Lord did. Therefore, if the Lord saw fit to rejuvenate himself physically by stopping his activity for a while, then maybe it'd be all right if we did that too, you know. What happens oftentimes, and what is a term that I don't think is in the Bible, but the principle is, that we oftentimes use to describe an individual who never does take a break. They end up doing what? Burning out. They're burnt out. And just about every area of a person's life ends up being affected by a person who is burned out, you know. They may be burned out. I was telling Greg this morning how that he was talking about a guy that had filled out was going to get a job somewhere, you know, and one of the questions they asked the fella in the interview was, can you give 100% all the time? And he said, no. I said, well, can you give 100% all the time? Well, I don't know if I want you working for me if you can't give 100% all the time. But yet all he was doing was being honest, you know. Sometimes the circumstances do not allow you to give 100% all the time. You know, there's some people in the congregation that I'll ask them, I said, are you up to 75% yet? Oh, 80% now. That's good. Good. And of course, what are you comparing it to? 80% of what you were when you was 50, that's all right if you're 80, you know. but we find things in our life that keep us from being able to excel and do what we would like to be able to do. Physical problems keep that from happening. Mental things, we're thinking about stuff that interferes with it. And I'd use the example when I was working in the boiler shop, and there we had a big contract and had to get it out soon. So they had us working 5 days a week, 12 hours a day. And then on Saturdays, 10 hours. And then on Sundays, we had a break, just 8 hours. And they expected you, by some stretch of the imagination, to work just as hard in those 12 hours as you did in an 8-hour shift. I couldn't do it. And one of the bosses said, well, you're a young man. I said, well, according to your reasoning, then if you're young enough, then you don't even have to sleep. You just work 24/7, No, if you're swinging a sledgehammer for 8 hours and putting all into it, then if you're expecting me to stay on the clock and continue to work for 4 more hours on top of that, then I'm going to start backing off a little bit so I'll survive till the going home whistle. I ain't going to do much more work than I would in 8 hours. You got to pace yourself. Pace yourself, or you can't survive physically. Now, if you're not doing some strenuous work, but even I found out over there in the intensive care units at Erlanger, those young nurses and young doctors, in their 30s, they were working 12-hour shifts, 4 12-hour shifts a week. And the one girl that got to know real well, that was there with us the whole time, she had worked 4 straight 12-hour days. And then she was doing that because she was going to have surgery, And so she's going to be off for 6 weeks. But I'll tell you what, she wasn't but just in her late 30s, but by the end of that 4th day, she is dragging. And they'd come in there in the morning, or at the beginning of their shift, and they're all, and by 12 hours, and they weren't near as old as me, So you can't overdo it that cause you to wear out physically. And then the rest of you gets wore out too. I've known preachers that burn out. Someone says, well, how could that ever happen? I mean, of all the people in the world that you would think wouldn't ever get to the point where they'd burn out, and yet they burn out. Yeah, I know some of them that preached for years, and then all of a sudden they just quit. Start building houses for a living, Well, if you can do that, better do it. If you can quit preaching and you can go building houses and not have any problems with that, then go ahead. Or maybe you shouldn't have burned out to begin with so that you could keep on preaching a few more years before you gave it up to do something else, So everything in this life is not easy. And the things that are more difficult can have a detrimental effect on us, even physical exhaustion. It's not good for our physical being, and of course it's not good for our spiritual well-being either, because all of it is connected together. Notice on the top of the next page, which is in quotation marks says what we've been saying, Satan covets a tired man and uses him. God rests a tired man and inspires him. Well, there's 2 diametrically opposed ideas associated with what happens when an individual is wore out. And of course, the example here of Elijah is given too in 1 Corinthians chapter 19, verse 1 through 4. All right, and any comments you have about any of these, just holler. All right, number 6. I know a lot of people that are doing this, and they didn't even realize they were having themselves. Talk to yourself. Anybody talks to themselves? Some people talk to themselves because they're the only person that'll listen to what they have to say. So they carry on a conversation with themselves, knowing that at least they'll get their point across to somebody. But what's the idea here of talking to yourself?
Be positive.
All right, being positive. Not talking down or talking in a negative, discouraging way, or, oh, I know it's going to be terrible. Oh, I can just tell, I can see the writing on the wall. The writing's on the wall, it's just going to be awful. Well, you've talked yourself into a corner that's becoming discouraging, whether that corner ever arrives or not. That's not the right way to talk with yourself. Talk in a positive way. Appreciating what you have, and realize that sometimes we end up bringing about our failures because we dwell on them all the time. When you're young, you dwell on stuff. You don't want it to happen. I remember used to lay in the bed at night worried about mom and daddy dying, you know. Well, that was about the most fruitless task that you could engage in as a kid, is worrying about something like that. And but yet that occupies your mind. And then somebody one time at about that same age that I was going through that period of time, somebody said, well, if you worry about something, that'll bring it about. Well, oh no, now it's worse. I don't want to think about it, but I'm thinking about it, and now it's going to be brought about. Yes, Lanny?
That boy used to he goes to baseball like that. He was a negative person. He'd tell me, you know, he goes, don't worry about striking out. You know, and I said, man, you're going to put that. Don't put that in there.
Don't put it in there, yeah.
Put that in there, there's no good in there.
No good at all. Just get up there, and if you strike out, that's all right. What? I wasn't even thinking about striking out. You said that. Now I know I'm going to. Yeah. You know, the old sometimes reverse psychology isn't that smart at all. So.
Just talking about the preachers burning out. Well, everybody's burned out. That's what they're doing. I think we expect too much out of ourselves. You know, a lot of people, when it's over the gospel, they consider this to be a sprint when really it's not.
That's right.
It's an endurance thing.
Exactly.
So we get discouraged because we think, well, if we're a preacher, we think, well, I can see that. Why can't they see it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a preacher, but I can understand how that works.
Yeah. And I've seen people before that, like you said, once they learn the truth, and they may have been involved in false religion before, or they may have been involved in no religion before, when they finally saw the truth, I mean, they were just excited. They were just bubbling over. Says, that's right, isn't it? That's right. I mean, I can name you some names of people right here in Dunlap that were like that. But now, well, they ain't darkened the door of the church building in 20 years, I guess, you know.
I used that term one time in a lesson down at Dollar years ago. I said, people, the whole way of the gospel, they start off like a whirlwind, you know. I said, then all of a sudden they look over in the amen corner, and they see people that remember the church for 40 years not doing anything. I said, they get discouraged. And I got strong about that. Said, you talking about me? I said, you weren't sitting in the corner.
And that is a discouraging thing, you know, for somebody to be on fire and wanting to be active, and it seems as though nobody's doing anything. Well, that's, and of course I'm talking about ancient history now, but that was one of the ploys of the Crossroad movement, became the Boston movement, it became the International Church of Christ movement, was playing off of the so-called lethargy that existed among Congregation of the Lord's people. They weren't doing anything, so the idea was it'd be better to do something, even if it's wrong, instead of not doing anything. Well, what kind of mentality is that? That's ignorant, you know. Why would you want to just be busy and not do something that was provably right? And of course, they were able to make inroads because of young people looking at older people, and seeing a lack of enthusiasm, and they use that as a dividing line between the old and the young, you know. And of course, so many times those arguments about the deadness of a congregation were founded, but sometimes, you know, the thing is, you don't post on the bulletin board in the front of the building and said, this is how many visits we made last week, or how many times we took food to the nursing home, or how many calls, or how many cards we sent, or all like, you know, don't do that. Don't broadcast the things that are done behind the scenes that don't get top billing, you know. And because of that, some people think, we're not doing anything, when they just don't know what's going on that they're unaware of, and make a false accusation because of that. Excuse me.
Paul tells us what to think about, you know, in Philippians chapter 4. And too many of us dwell on negative things, and we're always thinking the wrong thing about even ourselves or others.
Exactly.
About their motives, or we can't read people's minds.
No.
And it gets us into a negative spiral. And, you know, so we got to keep ourselves positive. And again, he tells us to think about things that are true and honest and just and pure and a good report. Think on those things.
Exactly. And it was the basis of those things that Paul chose to think about, where then he could say, I've learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith be content. You know. Wow, that's pretty good, Paul. I'd like to be there, you know. But he was there because the things that could have drug him down, you know, it wasn't easy to realize that your fellow laborers had turned their back on you and left you by your lonesome, and a Roman prison cell, That wasn't easy, It wasn't easy to find out that there were false teachers that were going along after you had preached the gospel in various cities and teaching Gentiles they had to be physical Jews before they could be saved. That wasn't an easy thing, Wasn't discouraging. It could have been discouraging. But Paul just, of course, addressed those matters and did not allow them to bring him down to the point where he burned out or gave up, obviously. Thinking the right things. You cannot, that's one of the things that's bad on the part of just about all of us to a certain degree. We think that we can connect the dots when the fact of the matter is that we invented the dots we're trying to connect. They ain't even mine. We just thought they was there, Well, I know why that happened. What was it that happened? Now, here's something that supposedly happened that happened, and now you're starting to figure out why when what you said you thought happened didn't even happen to begin with. How you going to figure out a motive for that? You got a real good imaginator, sounds like to me, You can't do that. You can't know what the motivation is behind a person's actions unless they tell you. And sometimes, even when they tell you, we don't believe it. They're lying then. So, and that's the very type of judging that is condemned in Matthew chapter 6. A hypocritical, jump into the conclusion type of judging that doesn't find itself based upon the truth. All right, number 7, which is closely associated with some of these other ones. In order to overcome discouragement, we have to fight and conquer self-pity. Self-pity. Now, the bad thing about self-pity is it's simply an outward demonstration of a self-problem beforehand, most times. A person feels sorry for themselves. I've had individuals to tell me that, so-and-so didn't call and check on me when I was sick, or so-and-so didn't send me a card when I was in the hospital or so. And after I'd listened to that for quite a while, I said, when's the last time you ever sent somebody a card or visited somebody at the hospital? Well, that shut them up real quick. They didn't. They hadn't, But yet they felt justified in condemning in somebody else what they failed in themselves. That's hypocrisy too, see. We have the tendency to think that the problems that we face are bigger, worse than anybody's ever faced in all the history of the world. I mean, they're so piled up on us that nobody's ever had to live and deal with stuff like this, which is, of course, false. Because Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 at verse 12, there hath no temptation taken you, verse 13, but that which is common to man. But God will not suffer you to be tempted above that which you're able, but will with the temptation also provide a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. In other words, anything and everything that we will ever face, both individually and collectively, has been faced with glowing colors by somebody in times past. And the only reason why we would fail in the face of these difficulties is because that's what we choose to do. There is a way of escape, so that we might be able to bear it, put up with it, tolerate it, not obviously be broken down because of it, or else God wouldn't be true to the promise that he makes right here. Number 8, accept the fact that you are of intrinsic value and are desperately needed. Now, that'd go a long way, and of course maybe that's a part of a problem as well, and somebody thinks I'm nothing, and since I'm nothing, then it doesn't really matter, But God, like the little boy said, God didn't make no junk, and God made me, therefore I'm not junk, Even though there may have been people that called him that and looked upon him like that, but he was not junk. He was, in fact, possessing a soul that was worth more than the whole world. That's pretty valuable. That's intrinsic value that the Lord placed upon the matter for sure. And of course, the example from 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and all of the various comparisons made to the human body as compared to the body of Christ. There is no such thing as a body part that is not needed, and when each body part in the physical body is doing its job, then that makes the body as a whole successful in whatever it's attempting to do. Same principle relative to the body of Christ. Every member of the body of Christ is important, is essential to the working of the whole. And when each member of the body of Christ is doing and performing their function, then and only then really is the body of Christ what it can and what it should be. That is by obvious choice on the part of the individuals, for sure. And of course the whole joke made, if the Lord knows every hair of your head, then He knows what you need, what you're desiring, and will provide those needs in accordance with His will. If God knows when a sparrow hits the ground, then certainly He knows the needs that we possess. Number 9, be perpetually optimistic. That means be optimistic all the time, which is sort of difficult. One of the examples given here, the first one is a fellow that was a shoe salesman. He got over in Africa and said, this is a terrible place to be a shoe salesman. Nobody wears shoes. And another shoe salesman said, this is the greatest place I've ever seen. Nobody has any shoes, therefore I can sell a pair of shoes to everybody here. Now, there's a side issue here. I've been told that no African that was barefooted ever had any foot problems until he started wearing shoes and started running track for some university in the United States or something. Then they start having foot problems. Leave them alone, let them run barefooted, and they won't have foot problems. But then a podiatrist don't have a job. So we got to fulfill the responsibilities to podiatrists. But that's another matter entirely. Be optimistic. The old half full or half empty glass of water. Which one is it? Which one is it? Number 10, consider how useless you are when you are discouraged. Not only are you yourself personally and individually not contributing anything worthwhile, but the influence that you exert is causing the same thing to happen to other people. Well, that's obviously not a good thing. You can't fulfill the responsibilities you possess when you're discouraged, and you're not likely to encourage anybody by your discouragement. It's probably going to rub off on somebody else. And then number 11, don't forget, God is a majority. So, if I am doing God's bidding, then I'm always in the majority. Not the way man counts noses and makes a determination about that. But if God be for us, who can be against us? Ultimately, what does it matter? If the whole world is against us but God's for us, then we're all right. Both now and eternally will be that way. He takes care of us for sure. Number 12, remember that every cause of your discouragement is only temporary. No matter what it is, even if it is a terminal illness, it's still temporary. It's limited to this world, I got a little old poem of a thing. Well, maybe not even a poem, but I've read before at a funeral, and it says, the title of it is What Cancer Can't Do, And there's a big old long list of things that cancer doesn't have the ability to do. We focus on what cancer does, but we don't focus on what it can't separate us from loved ones. It can't cause us to lose our faith. It can't have any impact on our eternal destiny. There's just so many things it can't do. And really the things that it can't do are the things that matter anyhow. The other stuff, while it's somewhat difficult, obviously, and not what we'd desire, then it's limited in what it can do to the here and the now. And we're not permanent residents here anyhow. We're strangers and pilgrims. We're just passing through. And number 13, don't forget that God has promised that you will never be tried. Well, I just used that a while ago. Will never be tried above your power to endure. There has nothing faced us but that we can overcome with the Lord's help. There is a way of escape. And then number 14, which could be the first one, of course, pray. Pray. If our difficulties are of such a degree that they're causing us to become discouraged and unfaithful in our pursuit of heaven above, then surely it is deserving of being brought to the throne of God and asking for His assistance to get through it. You know? And if it doesn't rise to that occasion, then what in the world are we discouraged for anyhow? You know? Because He knows and He cares. Fatalism, the last little section there, when discouraged, do not fatalistic give up. I think that might be fatalistically, maybe should give up. I mean, like quitters never win and winners never quit. You know, I mean that's true. If you quit, even if you are physically in a bad way, if you give up, then it's over. You know, it's over. Now I wouldn't go so far as to what Wanda said the other day. She said, "When you hit 80, it's over." I wouldn't go that far because I'm not 80 yet. And I might say it when I'm 80, Lord willing, if I make it that long.
Well, there's a lot of examples that we have, that we personally know people that are older than that and still
Exactly.
doing tremendous things.
Still alive and kicking, even at the advanced age. And of course, Wanda made that observation because 7 of her classmates or spouses of her classmates had passed away since their last reunion, you know. And I said, well, Wanda, when you're up there close to the age of dirt, that sort of happens, you know. And it does happen.
Me and two of my friends sat together about 4 or 5 months ago, sat and talked. It's like old times when laugh and talk for a long time. Now the two is young.
Is that right?
So we can't.
No. It's going to happen. Time and chance happens to us all, and of course we're reminded on a sometimes seem like a daily basis. You can't depend on tomorrow because you're not promised tomorrow. You're not promised this evening, much less a year from now. And so we don't want to put our eggs in the basket of the future when we're not even sure the future is going to be there. There may be some rotten eggs that somebody else has got to fool with them in the future. We're not there to do it. Anything else on this particular lesson? We got just a smidgen, not much time at all, to answer any questions. But we will very quickly do that, Lord willing, on Wednesday evening. We'll run through those, make sure we got the right answers. But obviously, hopefully we've seen that each one of these lessons, there's not a one of them that does not at least have the capacity to cause us real harm, you know. When you're talking about heart diseases and their cure, you know, we're not talking about cholesterol, we're not talking about valves and their need to be replaced, we're not talking about open heart surgery of a physical variety, but we're talking about something a whole lot more serious than that. So I said, more serious than that? Yeah. We're talking about the eternal destiny of the soul. And those type of heart diseases, if we do not get some remedies for a heart condition, then they can cost us our very eternal well-being. So they are definitely deserving of our attention, for sure. I don't want to start on these questions as we don't have just a few minutes left. Does anybody got any comments? Does anybody want to go to the bathroom? All right, let's go. Yes, ma'am. Oh, yeah. That's when you'll find out he's paying attention. Wow. Appreciate it, Rick, young feller.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We got a bunch of people in other places.